A pleasant morning, everyone. I am Marula Chica. I will be discussing about human capital, education and health, and economic development. People who lack education have trouble getting ahead in life, have worse health, and are poorer than the well educated ones. Major effects of lack of education include poor health, lack of voice, shorter lifespan, unemployment, exploitation, and gender inequality. Economies prosper when people are well educated and healthy, two key prerequisites for inclusive growth. Education and health, beyond their undeniable intrinsic value, enable people to realize their potential as productive members of society. Check out the images. Can you feel the child's happiness and contagious optimism? Can you sense the nurse's kindness toward the patient? Do you believe that education and health are crucial to our society? The topics to be discussed are first, the central roles of education, second, investing in education and health, the human capital approach, third, child labor, fourth, the gender gap, discrimination in education and health, fifth, educational systems and development, sixth, health measurement and disease burden, seven, health, productivity, and policy labor. The central roles of education and health. Education. It is necessary for having a satisfying and rewarding life. It plays a crucial role in developing nations' capacity for sustained growth and development, and the uptake of a modern technology. It increases productivity, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and promotes technological advances. Also, it provides security. It is yours forever and can't be taken from you. In fact, you can improve your employment prospects and expand your horizons by furthering your education and earning a bachelor's degree. Health. Health is central to one's well being. It increases productivity. Also, good health is crucial to learning and academic achievement. By analyzing healthcare providers, hospitals, clinics, and public health promotion activities, health economics can be used to encourage healthy behaviors and better health outcomes. Both the education and health are the primary goals of progress and worthy goals in their own right. Both are crucial to the concept of heightened capacities central to development. As inputs to the aggregate production function, health and education are also significant to economic expansion. The health and education sectors are particularly important to economic growth because they serve as the both inputs and outputs. Now let's move on to the improvements in the world of health and education. Year 1982. The first artificial heart was received by Barney Clark. An artificial heart helps with blood circulation and oxygenation. Today, this is most likely to be used for a patient who is waiting to receive a transplant. Year 2003. A full sequence of human genome has been determined. Once finished, the human genetic blueprint provided researchers with information about how genes are structured and organized. There are about 20,500 human genes, and they were found with the help of the project. Many different educational and scientific institutions from the United States and elsewhere got involved with this initiative from its very beginning in 1990. By 2013, about 80% of the hospitals were using electronic health records. This allows patients' information to be found in one spot. As to the improvements in education, I used Philippine education system as an example. The Philippines had an 11-year basic education cycle before World War II, with grades 1 to 7 for elementary and 4 years of high school. After the war, the American colonial government recommended a shift to 6 years for elementary, 3 years for junior high school, and 3 more years for senior high school. The transition began with the removal of grade 6 from elementary, but the addition of 2 years in high school was never completed. Since 1945, we have made the best of 10 years of basic education. the result of an incomplete transition and which was never meant to be a permanent state of affairs. Until today, K 12 is in fact one of the most well studied reform measures ever to be undertaken. For decades, dating back to 1925, we've tried to answer two questions. What should we teach in order to equip Filipinos for local needs and global standards? And second, how many years of school does it take to learn all the skills and information? Historical antecedents show that it was never a question of whether we should adapt K 12, but when it should be done. Finally, in 2010, the new administration identified education reform at the very top of its priorities and pushed for this reform through the Enhanced Basic Education Program, or K 12. K 12 isn't simply a matter of adding 2 more years of school. It is the product of decades of study and the larger process of reforming the education sector as a whole. The passage of the Enhanced Basic Education Act, or Republic Act 10533, aims to ensure the continuity of the reform beyond this generation or into the next. We must remember, although there is a correlation between health and education, a higher income at home is no guarantee of better health and education. Human capital investment can have a favorable influence on wages, but only if it is carried out fairly and efficiently. The relationship between education and health is never a simple one. Poor health not only results from lower educational attainment, it can also cause educational setbacks and interfere with schooling. Health conditions, disabilities, and unhealthy behaviors can all have an effect on educational outcomes. Voice of the poor. If you don't have money today, your disease will take you to your grave, said by an old woman from Ghana. When patients lack adequate health insurance, financial and biomedical considerations become intertwined in the clinical decision making process. When patients cannot afford the cost of care, doctors may be compelled to bend billing or reimbursement rules, lower standards, or turn them away if the medically indigent population is growing. 5 years ago, I have heard my father describe a similar situation. He discussed my deceased grandmother with me. She was identified as having a colon cancer. At that time, they lacked the funds to pay for medical expenses, and free medical services are not readily accessible to all. If they had the funds, perhaps my grandmother would still be alive today. It was so discouraging because colon cancer is easily treatable with a simple operation nowadays. I guess the timing was just not right. But I suppose that's life, and all we can do is accept and move on. Besides, we still have the opportunity to avoid a similar situation in the future. And we can do so with the help of proper education and healthcare. When it comes to the growth of the economy, education and health are linked with each other, with accumulation of more health capital leading to an increase in the return on investments made in education. Education is also crucial for the development and training of health staff, and a rise in production efficiency increases the return on a life-saving investment in health. In addition, education is significant for the development and training of health professionals. In spite of the extraordinary growth that human capital has experienced over the past 50 years, there's still a significant gap between industrialized nations and developing nations in terms of health and education, and it may be difficult to close this gap. Now, let's talk about the linkage between investment and health. Number one, health and education are investments made in the same individual. Number two, greater health capital may raise the return on investment in education for several reasons. The first one is health is an important factor in school attendance. Healthier children are more successful in school and learn more efficiently. Deaths of school-aged children also increase the cost of education per worker. Also, longer lifespans raise the return to investments in education. Healthier individuals are more able to productively use education at any point in their lives. Both a person's health and their education are considered investments in that person, with the former producing a higher return on investment. Number 3. Greater education capital may raise the return to investments in health in the following ways. Many health programs rely on skills learned in school, including literacy and numeracy. Schools also teach basic personal hygiene and sanitation. Education is needed for the formation and training of health personnel. Education leads to delayed childbearing, which improves health. Enhancement in productive efficiency from investments in education raise the return on a life-saving investment in health. Education boosts the return on investment in health, which ultimately results in postponed childbearing as well as increased levels of productivity. Improving health and education. Why increasing is not sufficient? High income countries have higher health and education levels, which can lead to higher productivity and incomes. A country's economy becomes more productive as the proportion of educated workers increases, since educated workers can more efficiently carry out tasks that require literacy and critical thinking. However, obtaining a higher level of education also carries a cost. The income elasticity of food demand measures the percent change in the consumption of total food or a certain food item or group of food of items to a percent change in the real income of consumers. Here it is important to note that income elasticity of demand for particular items therefore varies widely depending on income levels. This is as a result of two factors. First, income is spent on other types of goods in addition to food, and second, a portion of increased expenditures on food is used to increase food variety while maintaining the same level of calorie consumption. In order to alleviate absolute poverty, development policy needs to simultaneously prioritize issues pertaining to income, health, and education. The second subtopic would be investing in education and health, the human capital approach. What do you mean by human capital? Human capital is productive investments embodied in human persons, including skills, abilities, ideals, health, and locations, often resulting from expenditures on education, on the job training programs, and medical care. Age earning profiles indicate that earnings are highly correlated with education. At every age, the highly educated as a group earn more than their counterparts with us educated, and therefore there is no crossing of profiles. Earning rise with age to a single peak after which there is a slow decline. The profiles are steeper for higher educated individuals than for those with less education. Also, the higher the level of education attained by a worker, the later the age at which earning reached their peak. Formally, the income gains can be written as follows, where E is income with extra education, N is income without extra education, T is year, I is the discount rate, and the summation is over expected years of working life. The formula is the summation of E sub t minus N sub t over the quantity of 1 plus I raised to t. Figure 8.2 provides a schematic representation of the trade-offs involved in the decision to continue in school. It is assumed that the individual works from the time he or she finishes school until he or she is unable to work, retires, or dies, which is taken to be 66 years. Two earnings profiles are presented for workers with primary school but no secondary education and those with a full secondary but no higher education. For an individual in a developing country deciding whether to go on from primary to secondary education, 4 years of income are foregone, and there is also a direct cost such as fees, school uniforms, books, and other expenditures. The rate of return will be higher whenever the discount is lower, the direct or the indirect costs are lower, or the benefits are higher. In sub-Saharan Africa, the private rate of return to primary education is over 37%, but many families do not make this investment due to the lack of money. The table indicates the social rate of return, which is found by including the amount of public subsidy for the individual's education as part of the direct cost. It should be noted that These social returns are probably understated because they do not take into account the externality that educated people confer on others. Now let's talk about child labor. The term child labor is often defined as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential, and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. The International Labour Organization or ILO, a UN body that has played a leading role on the child labour issue, reported in its 2010 quadrennial report on child labour that as of 2008, there was a total of 306 million children between ages 5 and 17 doing some kind of work, but one-third of this is considered as permissible work based on national laws and existing ILO conventions. But 215 million are classified as child laborers because they are either under the minimum age for work or above that age, in which they engage in work that poses a threat to their health, safety, or morals, or are subject to conditions of forced labor. More than half of all laborers live in Asia and the Pacific, but sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rates of child labor. Child labor remains a problem in the Arab states where the issue has been largely ignored until very recently. Clearly, child labor is not an isolated problem, but a widespread one, especially in Africa and South Asia. Nevertheless, it is not obvious that an immediate ban on all forms of child labor is always in the best interest of the child. But there is one set of circumstances under which both the child laborer and the family as a whole may be unambiguously better off with a ban of child labor or what we call multiple equilibria. Now, consider the labor demand curve or DL. If demand is inelastic enough to cut the AA line above the WH and also cut the TT line below WL, there will be two stable equilibria, labeled as E1 and E2 in the diagram. When there are two equilibria, if we start out at the bad equilibrium E2, an effective ban on child labor will move the region to the good equilibrium E1. Moreover, once the economy has moved to the new equilibrium, the child labor ban will be self-enforcing because by assumption, the new wage is high enough for no family to have to send its children to work. It may appear that prohibiting child labor when there is an alternative equilibrium in which all children attend school is an irresistible policy. But note that while the families of child laborers are better off, employers may be worse off because they must now pay a higher wage. In this sense, child labor, even its worst forms, could actually be Pareto optimal, a discovery that should remind us that Pareto optimality is sometimes a very weak condition on which to base development policy. In the same way, many other problems of underdevelopment, including extreme poverty itself, may also be Pareto optimal in the sense that resolving these issues may be detrimental to the wealthy ones. While these child labor models are probably reasonable depictions of many developing areas, we do not know enough about conditions in which unskilled labor markets to say how significant these types of multiple equilibria and severe credit constraints really are as explanations for child labor. Thus, it would be potentially counterproductive, if even if enforceable, to seek an immediate ban on all child labor in all parts of the world today. There are four approaches to child labor. Number one, the first step is to acknowledge that child labor is a symptom of poverty and to advocate for strategies to end poverty rather than focusing solely on child labor. Number two, emphasizes strategies to get more children into school. This second approach emphasizes strategies to get more children into school, including expanded school places such as new village schools and conditional cash transfer or CCT incentives to induce parents to send their children to school, such as the Progreso Oportunidades program in Mexico. This strategy has widespread support from many international agencies and development bodies. It is probably a more effective approach than making basic education compulsory because without complementary policies, the incentives to send their children to work would still remain strong and enforcement is likely to be weak. For the same reasons, That regulation of the informal sector has proved almost impossible in many other cases. Compulsory schooling is a good idea, but it is not by itself sufficient solution to the problem of child labor. Improving the quality of basic schooling and increasing accessibility are also very important. The fraction of national income spent on basic education in a majority of low income countries remains problematic. Number 3. Considers child labor inevitable, at least in the short run, and stresses palliative measures such as regulating it to prevent abuse and to provide support services for working children. This approach is most commonly associated with UNICEF, which has prepared a checklist of regulatory and social approaches that could meet the best interest of the child. The regulations included on UNICEF's checklist include expanding educational opportunities through time off for standard or workplace schooling, encouraging stricter law enforcement against illegal child labor trafficking, providing support services for parents and for children working on the streets, and working to develop social norms against the economic exploitation of children. Number 4. Favors banning child labor. The fourth approach most associated with the ILO, which favors banning child labor. If this is not possible, however, and recognizing that child labor may not always result from multiple equilibrium problems, this approach favors banning child labor in its most abusive forms. The latter approach has received much attention in recent years. The ILO's worst form of child labor convention was adopted in 1999. The worst forms covered under the convention include all forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, such as the sale and trafficking of children, death bondage and serfdom, and forced or compulsory labor, child prostitution and pornography, other illicit activities such as drug trafficking and work that, by its nature or the circumstances, is likely to harm the health, safety, or morals of the children. The gender gap, discrimination in education and health. In point of fact, assuming that men and women have a similar distribution of innate abilities, restrictions placed on women's access to education and employment distort the economy by artificially reducing the pool of talent from which employers can draw, which in turn lowers the average productivity of the production factor. In nearly every developing country with a low or lower middle income, the educational opportunities available to young women are significantly less than those available to young males. Closing the educational gender gap is important because the social rate of return on women's education is higher than that of men. Education for women increases productivity and lowers fertility. Educated mothers have a multiplier impact on the future generations. Education can break the vicious cycle of poverty and inadequate schooling for women. The decline in female youth enrollment and graduation rates. According to UNESCO, school closures have sent about 90% of all students out of school, among them more than 800 million girls. Young women and girls are recognized as one of the vulnerable groups in the COVID 19 pandemic. As can be seen, women are significantly more affected than men, which is a situation that should raise serious concerns. A survey conducted by Plan International among young women and girls found that the inability to study at home has two leading causes. The first one is the internet connectivity problems, and the second one, the need to help with household chores. There are 129 million girls of school-going age who are not currently enrolled in any form of education anywhere in the world. This number includes 32 million girls of primary school age, 33 million girls of lower secondary school age, and 67 million girls of upper secondary school age. Girls are more than twice as likely to be out of school in countries that are experiencing conflict compared to the girls who live in countries that are not experiencing conflicts. In only 49% of the world's countries, gender equality in primary education has been achieved. The gender gap becomes even more pronounced in secondary education, where only 42% of countries have achieved gender parity in lower secondary education, and only 24% have achieved gender parity in upper secondary education. Gender bias sets rudimentary limits on future potential and creates inequality in the classroom. It also discourages women from taking courses such as math, science, and engineering. In aspects of education, men are more likely to have an opportunity to go to school than women. Studies have shown that investing in the basic education of girls yields one of the highest rates of return of any investment, and it is estimated that the annual cost to the global economy of not educating girls is $92 billion. However, evidence from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other countries shows that education of girls will not increase automatically with family income, and that unequal education and healthcare access for girls is due to economic incentives and cultural setting. Gender inequality also poses barriers for women and girls to access health information and critical services, including restrictions on mobility, lack of decision making autonomy, limited access to finances, lower literacy rates, and discriminatory attitudes of healthcare providers.